Hello and good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today for the signing of House Bill 1125. There is a dangerous movement spreading across America today. It's advancing under the guise of a false ideology and pseudo-science. It's being pushed onto our children through radical activists, social media, and online influencers. And it's trying to convince our children that they are in the wrong body. This dangerous movement attempts to convince these children that they're just a surgery away from happiness. It threatens our children's innocence, and it threatens their health. I stand before you today to sign legislation that puts a stop to this in Mississippi and protects our kids. House Bill 1125 bans gender transition procedures through both drugs and surgeries for those under the age of 18. It also prevents public funds from supporting prohibited gender transition procedures, stops Medicaid from covering gender transition procedures on kids under 18, and it establishes penalties for those who violate this law. Due to the rise of those trying to influence young, impressionable children and the negative health effects and health consequences that comes with their influence, this legislation is more necessary today than ever before. And I am proud to stand before you and sign it. You know, it's almost unimaginable that this is where we are in today's America. Having to sign legislation that protects our kids from those pushing chemicals and castration, I honestly never thought I'd see this day. But yet, here we are. Thanks to these activists, our kids, in many ways, are now their guinea pigs. To them, I say, not in Mississippi. When it comes to how these drugs, surgeries, and procedures are truly impacting our kids, most of the time, we're just not getting the truth. We're told over and over and over again by those on the far left that they're safe. We're told, don't worry, the kids will be fine, and that potential side effects are, at worst, minimal. And if you stand up and ask questions, well, you're unfairly labeled as intolerant or transphobic, and you're attacked and censored. So today, let me be clear. In a world that's upside down when it comes to doing right by our kids, Mississippi will once again fight to keep our state right side up. And that's why Mississippi will also, once again, follow the science and keep our kids safe. To the Mississippians watching today, here are just some of the indisputable facts being covered up by those looking to experiment on our children. First, the FDA has not approved puberty blockers for stopping normally timed puberty in youth experiencing gender dysphoria. Second, despite what some claim, these non-FDA approved drugs can lead to a range of potential negative side effects, including low bone density, altered adult height, and impaired special memory. These types of experiments often lead to a disruption of basic reproductive functions and ultimately infertility. This is truly scary stuff that's being pushed upon our kids and, yes, their loving parents. They are being taken advantage of. Also, some can push their warped view on gender or appear to be woke for their friends. On top of the very sick things they're pushing on our kids, they are also actively twisting medical studies, reporting findings out of context, and overemphasizing results while ignoring the important fine print that comes along with them. There's really no other way to say this. The very foundation their arguments depend upon are simply not true. And many members of the media are either unwilling or afraid to tell you what the real situation is. Well, I'm not afraid to tell you. Here's the real situation. Of the relatively few studies that exist which claim some benefits for children, their flaws, as often recognized by the authors, are profound. The potential benefits are totally unclear, but the negative impacts are obvious. That's why I believe it's so important for Mississippians to understand that the so-called benefits being parroted by radical activists do not have adequate long-term studies to back up their claims. As a father of three, this issue is too important to sit down and stay quiet. I'm not going to be silenced, nor am I going to be censored on this issue. Healthcare is about healing, not hurting. The principle of do no harm should never be forgotten. And that's why I'm thankful for the many parents and medical professionals who are loudly speaking out on this issue. As I said just a few weeks ago in my State of the State, we don't let 11-year-olds enter an R-rated movie alone. Nor do we let them drive. Nor do we let them get a tattoo. Yet some would have us believe that we should push permanent body-altering surgeries on them at such a young age. Puberty is complicated enough without online personalities telling young girls and boys that the challenging feelings they're experiencing are a result of being born in the wrong body. It's all the more disturbing when we realize how studies have revealed the shockingly high rates of anxiety, depression, autism, and other mental issues that exist within the population of children who have fallen prey to this ideology. While some in America carve out a truly delusional position on this issue, countries all over the world are moving in the exact opposite direction. Even liberal darlings like Finland and Denmark and Sweden don't allow these surgeries to be performed on kids who are under the age of 18. Fundamentally, this is a war on objective scientific truth, and it's a fight over basic biology. Today, far too many people are fearful of the online woke mob, which demands complete and total acquiescence on this issue. It attempts to tell parents that they're not allowed to question their children or the origins of these feelings. Yet, the loud, emerging voice of the many kids who are and have detransitioned are clear. They needed somebody to listen to them, to love them, and they needed help to sort through their problems, not to blindly affirm their beliefs. At the end of the day, there are only two positions here. One tells children that they're beautiful just the way that they are, that they can find happiness in their own bodies. The other tells them that they should take drugs and cut themselves up with expensive and experimental procedures in order to find freedom from depression. I know which side I'm on. No child in Mississippi will have these drugs or surgeries pushed upon them. This stops today. We are taking a stand for all of our children. House Bill 1125 is now law. At this time, I'd like to invite someone up here to give some remarks who has covered this issue around the country. Matt Walsh is a writer for the Daily Wire who I think will be helpful as we discuss this legislation and its importance. Matt, would you please come up here and say a few words? And thank you for being in Mississippi.
Thank you. Great. Well, I want to thank the governor and the lawmakers here in Mississippi who have done the right and necessary thing by banning the horrific medical abuse of children. I'm extremely encouraged to not only see this law being passed, but to see the national movement that we have been able to build, pushing back against the gender ideology madness that has a stranglehold on our society and on our children for far too long. The reality is that this is not a difficult issue, as the governor's already covered. It's quite straightforward, in fact. If we lived in a sane society run by sane people, we would all be able to agree on this point. The question of whether it's ever okay to castrate and sterilize and mutilate a child would be answered in one loud and unified voice, saying without hesitation, not only no, but hell no. That is how all normal, common sense, decent Americans answer the question, and they don't have to think about it. But sadly, many of the people who hold power in this country and who run our institutions do not pass this basic test of human decency. These vultures have lined up to feast on and profit from the confusion of innocent kids. Confusion that these same vultures have intentionally fostered in the minds of our youth. They create the identity crisis, and then they monetize it. These kids are put on so-called puberty blockers to chemically castrate them, drugs that, by the way, have been given to sex offenders to chemically castrate them, and now we give them to kids. Off-brand cancer drugs that we're giving to children. They're given cross-sex hormones, which have irreversible and permanent effects. And before the age of 18, many kids will undergo surgeries, such as double mastectomies. Now, the kids cannot choose any of this. They cannot consent to it. They can't understand what they're doing or what the long-term effects or even short-term effects are going to be. You know, I often make the same point that the governor just made, and it's an important point, that many of the people who support and advocate for this butchery are not petitioning to lower the drinking age. You don't hear them calling for laws to make sure that kids have access to tobacco or firearms. They aren't marching in the street demanding that 13-year-olds should be able to get tattoos or open credit card accounts or take out mortgages. In all of these cases, they recognize that minors have neither the maturity nor the powers of discernment nor the psychological nor neurological formation required to make these sorts of choices. And yet these gender ideology advocates want us to believe that the child who can't be trusted with a can of beer or with a credit card should be trusted to permanently transition into a different gender. It's madness. It is incoherent. And all the more incoherent when you consider that nobody actually can transition into a different gender. That's not physically possible. It's not medically possible. The doctors are lying to confused people. So the very fact that a child desires to do such a thing in the first place is proof in itself that she isn't thinking clearly and doesn't understand what she's saying or what she claims to want, which is not unusual for children. That's why they're children. We simply cannot allow this evil to continue. We cannot tolerate it. We who are decent and rational people, we who love our children, we who recognize basic truths. And one of the most basic truths is that children who are confused about their identity need guidance and love and clarity. They don't need hormone injections and scalpels. They need and deserve to be protected from the child-abusing quacks and soulless goblins who wish to exploit their confusion for their own financial gain. That's why we need this law. Our kids cannot protect themselves. They cannot protect themselves. We need to do it. That's our job as adults. And everybody who's remained silent on this issue is culpable in what is happening to our kids. Many members of the media who have not demonstrated the slightest bit of skepticism, as the medical establishment has just told us over the years, that it's life-saving care to castrate a child, and you have members, the majority of the media, that just goes along with that, doesn't ask one skeptical question about it, all culpable in this. That's why we need to protect our kids. We can and we must. And now Mississippi has. And finally, I would only say to any other state that hasn't gotten on board with protecting kids that it's time to get on board. Okay, it's time to get on board. It's time to do the right thing. It's way past time. We have to act now. And I'll turn it back to the governor. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate those words, and I would like to echo what Matt has said in that I hope this legislation can inspire other states to take a stand on behalf of our nation's kids. Mississippi is not the first to pass this bill, but we are amongst the first. There are 7 or 8 other states, including Alabama and Arkansas and Tennessee and Utah and several others. But I want to thank Representative Gene Newman, who is here today, for filing this bill, for Nick Bain, the chairman, and who presented it on the floor of the House, who is also here with us today, and we'll take some pictures in just a few minutes. I also want to thank Speaker of the House Philip Gunn, who is here with us today, and also Senator Joey Fillingane, who presented this bill on the floor of the Mississippi State Senate. I want to personally thank each and every one of those individuals for taking a stand to help protect our children. And now it is all of us as adults' responsibility to be there for our kids and show them love and responsibility and work through whatever challenges may be in their lives. So with that, we will never tire and we will never cease when it comes to protecting and defending the health and safety and well-being of Mississippi's kids. Thanks for being here today. With that, I'll open the floor to questions. We're going to start in the very back, and then we'll go around the room. Okay.
Thank you, Shelby. Thank you, Governor. My opening question would be, since this bill is kind of on the same guideline around, well, obviously different than what your plan is with postpartum Medicaid expansion, how is this going to, these two laws going to work towards helping Mississippi Rural Hospital?
Well, I will tell you that this particular bill that I just signed into law, its entire focus is on helping Mississippi kids. It's not about helping institutions. It's not about helping entities. It's about helping Mississippi kids and protecting them from making decisions that they are not old enough and responsible enough to make on their own, and protecting them. And I really don't think that it has anything to do with the postpartum Medicaid issue, nor do I think it really has anything to do with the plight of healthcare institutions around the state. Emily.
Governor, you often refer to yourself as a numbers guy, and in the last many months when you've been asked about postpartum Medicaid expansion, you said that you haven't seen any proof that the numbers will work. In your statement on Sunday, you still expressed skepticism on that point. Can you talk about that, please?
Sure. As I have said many times in the past when looking at the postpartum Medicaid issue, the data is incomplete at best and is often used by the crowd that wants to expand government no matter the cost. It's utilized in such a way that is that it just doesn't make sense with what the data actually says. And so as we continue to get more information in, we're going to continue to look at the data. This particular decision for me was a recognition that in the post-Dobbs world, that it is, we as conservatives are going to have to be willing to do some things that may make us philosophically uncomfortable. It certainly stands to reason that if moms have access to care for a period of time longer than 2 months after birth, that it is likely that a higher percentage of them will actually get that care, and that care will help them become healthier moms. And hopefully over time that will drive down some of the issues and some of the challenges that we have in Mississippi. Our state, and this is another point I think that's very important to make, I've been governor since January the 20th of 2020. For the vast majority of that time, in fact, for some 98, 99% of the time that I've been governor, every mom and every baby has had access to 12 months of postpartum care. The reason that is the case is because when the federal public health emergency went into effect, it was made allowable as a requirement by the federal government. And so what has changed since that time is the Biden administration has announced that the public health emergency is going to end in April. And so while every mom has had access to that 12 months, that will no longer be the case unless action is taken by the state dating sometime before that April day. Yes, sir.
Governor, doctors in the state say that these surgeries are not being performed in Mississippi. Is this a preventative action, or are you under the belief that they are happening?
You know, it's interesting to me because we've had a lot of different arguments made about this particular bill over the last 6 months. Over the last 6 weeks. And if we want to take the position that, hey, we're just doing this on a preventative basis, and therefore because we don't want it to happen in our state, then that's fine for us to say that. And I'm willing to take this as a victory if that's the case. But what's been ironic to me is that over the last 6 weeks, the opponents of this legislation started by saying, if we pass this bill, young children are going to die. Over the last few days, the argument has shifted, and the opponents are saying, well, this hadn't been happening anyway, so why on earth would you pass a bill to prevent something that hasn't happened anyway? The fact is, you can believe one of those two things, but you can't believe both. You cannot believe both. But what I can tell you is going forward, if any of these procedures were to occur on a kid that's under the age of 18, they are violating the law. Now, I know Matt was very involved with respect to some conversations at Vanderbilt, and I think it would be helpful if he gave his perspective on this as well, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I think on the question of whether or not it's happening, the first thing to always keep in mind is that you're relying on these medical institutions to be honest about what they're doing and to report the data honestly, and there's just no reason to have that kind of faith. Remember, we're dealing with people that mutilate kids for money, so not exactly the most trustworthy. But what we do know is that a few things. Number one, if it happens to one child who's mutilated, castrated, drugged, it's way too many. It would be worth a law in every state to prevent this from happening to one child. It's happening to a lot more than one. We also know that where the trend is heading right now. You know, if you go back 10 years ago, this was almost unheard of. And since then, there's been this exponential increase in children being diagnosed with gender dysphoria year over year, and then children being, quote unquote, treated with these drugs, which really are, again, chemical castration, mutilation drugs. So if you say right now, well, look at the number of kids, it's not that many. I don't know how anyone could possibly say it's not that many, considering what's happening to them. You also have to look at the trends and where it's heading, and where we've been and where we are now. And that's why if we don't pass laws now to stop this, check back in 5 years, check back in 10 years. That's why I say now is the time to pass these laws and to protect the kids who have not had this happen to them yet.
Yes.
Governor, on what you mentioned earlier where those two ideas conflict, I believe they were talking about surgeries are not happening, but the hormone therapies were for 16 years and older. But for those students that are, those teens that are getting those services or have been getting those services, they won't be going forward, they were saying to me that that's helped them be more self-confident. It's helped them avoid suicide because they felt more self-confident in who they were. What do you think this can mean for those students or people who will no longer have an option to either even delay their puberty so they could address it later down the line?
Yeah, what I would say is this law is clear. It is the law of the land in the state of Mississippi that if you are under the age of 18, that neither those surgeries nor those drugs altering behavior will be allowed in Mississippi going forward. I don't think that there's any doubt that that we as a state and we as individuals, and particularly those of us in the faith community, have to continue to do more. We have to continue to do more with respect to those babies that are born out of wedlock. We have to continue to do more for those individuals, for those moms who find themselves in unplanned or unwanted pregnancies, particularly in a post-obs world. And I think we've got to continue to find solutions as a state to help those individuals, regardless of their age, whether they're 14 or 16 or 18, that are struggling in life with mental issues, that we're there for them as well. Yeah.
I would also note as well that what you'd mentioned about it prevents suicide, there is no good data to back that up whatsoever. In fact, the best long-term study that's been done on this shows that suicidality for trans people is the highest years after the so-called affirmative care. But the main issue is that there really aren't that many credible, reliable long-term studies. Well, why is that? Well, the answer is that we haven't done this to kids on this kind of scale ever before in history. And so this group of children right now, they are the lab rats. We're experimenting on them. And so anytime you hear from medical authorities that, well, we know that it prevents suicide, what they're telling you is that they think it does, they assume it does, they claim it does. They couldn't possibly have the evidence for it, because to have the evidence for it, they would need to be able to point to thousands of kids who were transitioned 15 years ago, and let's check back in with them and see how they're doing now. We just started doing that at this scale recently, and it's also just it also defies common sense as well. The idea that not only does it defy common sense, but I find it frankly grotesque that the way to stop a child from tragically hurting themselves is to affirm their belief that there's something wrong with their body, that they were born in the wrong body, that they're the wrong person. No, the way to help anyone who's in despair in that way, especially a child, is to help them towards actual self-acceptance, who you really are. So if you're a biological male and you're a boy and you're 15 years old and you feel like you're a girl, the message should be, no, you're a boy, and that's a wonderful thing to be who you are. And we will help you to accept that, because it's wonderful to be who you are. This is who you are. That should be our message. Instead, the message they get from the medical community is, well, okay, if you feel like you were born in the wrong body, then you were, and we'll start chopping pieces of you off until the bad thoughts go away. And I just find that to be utterly horrific and insane on its face.
Scott.
Governor, the Jackson mayor has been on several national programs lately, calling the attempts for expanding the Capital Improvement District and other measures as being racist, an attempt to undermine black leadership and to protect the most whitely, densely populated portions of the city of Jackson. Can you address that, or do you care to?
Well, there's no doubt that that there are certain leaders in the city of Jackson that make claims of racism anytime anyone points out their downfall in leadership and their lack of responsible actions, their unwillingness to take responsibility. for the plight of this city. I've lived in the city of Jackson for somewhere between 15 and 20 years of my life. The city of Jackson has great potential, but there are a few things that cities have to do to ensure that they are vibrant. And one of the core functions of government is to ensure public safety. Now, I said from this podium the last time I gave a press conference, and perhaps I was wrong. I said that Jackson was the murder capital of the world. I was attacked for saying that because they believe that I got it wrong, because there are 3 cities in other countries that have a higher murder rate than Jackson. There are no other cities in the United States that have a higher per capita murder rate than the city of Jackson. And so there are those in the city, and they are residents that are begging for help. They're begging for the state's help for law and order. We know that the Jackson Police Department has some good individuals who work there. We also know that there's just far too few of them. And so when we as a state saw our capital city struggling with crime, we set up the Capital Complex Improvement District. We've invested millions of dollars annually in a police force. And while some of the city's elected leaders do not like that, do not like the fact that the state is spending millions of dollars on law enforcement, and that if a crime is committed inside the district, those individuals who commit that crime are going to get arrested, I can tell you from experience that there are an awful lot of people who live here who really do appreciate it. They appreciate the fact that the Capitol Police shows up when they are called. They appreciate the fact that if a crime is committed, Capitol Police is there to assist the victims and to find the criminals. And so I couldn't be prouder of the work that the Capitol Police is doing inside the city limits. There's legislation in various chambers and various areas with respect to how we take the next step. I told you when I was here a week or so ago that House Bill 1020 and the conversation surrounding that is being led by individuals that maybe don't have the bill perfect yet. It's had a lot of changes over the last several weeks in trying to get it more perfect and to make it a better bill. But I will tell you that I thought from the time that it was introduced in the House to the time that it actually passed the House floor, there was a lot of really good improvements made. The bill that was amended in the Senate, I thought took a pretty big step back towards just sending money to the same entities and institutions that exist now, and I don't think that's the right approach. But again, it's a process, and the process is members of the House, members of the Senate are trying to improve the bill, and I'm hopeful that they get something to my desk that I can agree to and that we can sign, so that we can make sure that we are giving the Capitol Police the resources they need to help ensure law and order in what can be a great city.
Is it fair to suggest that it undermines black leadership in the capital city?
I don't think so, Scott. I think that if the leadership in the city wants to invest in the Jackson Police Department, I think that'd be a great thing for them to do. If they want to invest in the court system, I think that'd be a great thing to do. The state certainly has done that over the years. We have put money in the Capitol Police. We put money during last session in helping the Hinds County District Attorney hire more prosecutors. The legislature and with my signature put more money in helping ensure that the Chief Justice could appoint special judges. That's one of the ironies of the arguments being made now is we have special judges inside Hinds County today, special judges that are help clearing the docket for those elected leaders. Oh, by the way, we also have inferior courts in jurisdictions all over Mississippi, those who have white leaders, those who have black leaders. This issue is not about race. It's about curtailing crime and making Jackson have the opportunity and the potential that we need it to have, so that we can bring businesses back to Jackson, so that we can bring people back to Jackson. Because make no mistake, while we may disagree on how we get there, Mississippi needs a vibrant and successful capital city. And with the crime wave that has occurred over the last several years, it makes it really difficult to do that. And so I commend those that are trying to find solutions, and I look forward to seeing what kind of bill gets across the finish line, and hopefully it's one that I can support. Yes.
If a trans child needed to go on puberty blockers for a reason like precocious puberty, but the blockers would also have the effect of being gender-affirming care, will that now be permitted under the bill?
I don't believe that's allowed under the bill. I do not.
You said that the Senate version of House Bill 1020 was a step back. If that was the version that reached your desk, could you support it?
Well, again, while we're 2 months into the session, I don't think that will be the version that reaches my desk. I think as it has been changed and amended multiple times over the last 2 months, it's likely to continue to be amended. It's out of committee. It's on the floor, I believe, in the Senate. And it has been changed, so it is therefore by definition will go back to the House of Representatives. Highly likely that goes into conference, and I'm hopeful that a bill gets to me that I can sign, and I don't think it'll be that one. Yes, Cornelia.
What do you say to opponents of 1125 who say that it seems to them to be a disconnect between your support of parental rights and this cutting off of their parental medical decision making?
What I would tell you is I do not believe that kids under the age of 18 should be allowed to enter into surgeries that are, in essence, mutilation. I don't believe that kids under the age of 18 should be allowed to have these puberty-blocking drugs, because I think what we're ultimately going to find, as was mentioned earlier, is that the long-term consequences and the long-term effects of those kids doing that are going to be far greater than any short-term effects of what some may argue are positive, but I see no argument for that. So you want to touch that as well?
Sure. On the parental rights bit, I think that, really it's a simple answer that we believe in parental rights. I believe in parental rights. But you don't have the right to directly harm your child. Child abuse is against the law in every state, as well it should be. And even if parents are, I think in some cases parents themselves are being duped by the medical establishment, and then in a sense become victims as well. But whatever it is that motivates it, if you're sending your kid in to be chemically castrated and sterilized, you are harming your child, and you shouldn't be allowed to do that under the guise of parental rights or under the guise of anything else. I would also say too that no matter what adults say, and no matter what adults approve of a child undergoing these kinds of treatments, those adults don't have to live with it. A young girl is getting double mastectomy, a boy's being chemically castrated, someone's being sterilized. Children are having the ability in the future when they're adults to have children of their own, is being taken away from them. Well, that's a burden that they're going to have to bear on their own. Which is yet another reason why we need to step up as adults and protect them.
I'm going to go to the back. You have one? Okay. We'll come out. Emily?
One more question about the postpartum position that you've now taken. We've been in the post-dogs world since late June. What took you so long to come to this position?
As I mentioned earlier, Emily, the 12 months of postpartum care, every single mom in the state of Mississippi has it today. Every single mom. Every single mom. Mississippi has presumed eligibility for moms that have a pregnancy. And so if you have presumed eligibility for every mom and you have a public health emergency in effect, which is in effect until late April, so that is the date at which those benefits would go away. if Mississippi doesn't do anything. And so from a timing standpoint, I would just simply say it was not necessary for any mom to get additional coverage up until this point. We're now in that point in the legislative session where decisions have to be made by our legislative leaders, and I felt like it was time for me to give my opinion on this particular topic.
In the back. I spoke to some people outside today who opposed this now law, and they said that they framed it as politicians versus doctors, parents, and transgender people. What makes you think that these politicians have the expertise or the authority to sort of overrule a parent, a child, and their medical profession?
Well, what I would tell you is the argument that you just made is certainly valid if you're talking about adults, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds. I am highly against 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds getting these types of surgeries. But the libertarian in me kind of says if that's what you want to do to your body, okay. But not to children. This law forbids any of these activities for kids under the age of 18. And and I know what the next question is going to be, by the way. Oh yeah, well if you say that an individual wants to do this to their own body, then why are you pro-life and why are you against abortion and why don't you let women make their own decision? Because the answer to that is simple. Because there's an unborn child when it comes to the pro-life discussion. There's an unborn child at play. And just like those of us who happen to be in elected office and are politicians, which is a dirty word, it's almost a four-letter word, and I get it, but just like us as politicians should stand up for the rights of unborn children, in this instance we should also stand up for the rights of those that are 18 years and younger and to protect them. Scott.
Considering the postpartum Medicaid decision, are you willing to consider modifications on expanding Medicaid in
No.
Mississippi?
No. Yes.
Governor, sorry, just one more question for you. And this is, of course, a different subject than what we've been pertaining to. But that being said, though, how important is it for you that an income tax bill, to cut an income tax bill, go to your desk during this time of the session?
Eliminating the income tax is very important to me. But I'll tell you, it's not just important to me, it's very important to Republicans all over the state of Mississippi. And the fact that the bill did not move out of the House or the Senate is very disappointing to me, and I think it's very disappointing to Republicans all over this state. And that's something that we're going to have to deal with. Let's remember, total budget last year, or excuse me, the current fiscal year is $6.4 billion. $6.4 billion. We're going to collect almost $8 billion. So one of two things is going to happen. Either the legislature is going to significantly increase the size of government by increasing the budget, or we're going to continue to cut or eliminate the income tax and let you keep more of your money. Those are the two options. And I know where I come down on that, and that is I think you know better how to spend your money than any governmental entity ever will. And I think, by the way, the vast majority, if not, the vast majority of Republicans in the House of Representatives certainly agree with that. And I know that there's a large number of Republicans in the Senate that agree with that. And I think we as a state, and certainly me as the governor, are going to continue to push for that, whether it be during this legislative session, a potential special session, or some other time. Yes.
I just wanted to follow up on my question. So how will a doctor or a pharmacist know they're providing puberty blockers to both trans or non-trans children for lawful purposes now under this law? Are all doctors now taking a risk providing puberty blockers simply because they could be giving it to a trans child?
I'm hopeful that every physician in the state that prescribes medicine knows their patient and knows what types of medicines that they are prescribing and what types of medicine they are not prescribing. Courtney.
Governor, on the issue of ballot initiative, there was a bill and a resolution from the Senate side. It has been referred to Constitution Committee in the House. It doesn't look like they're scheduled to meet today. Just want to get your reaction to what you think about whether or not a ballot initiative process should be reinstated in some form.
Look, I'm not familiar exactly where that is in the process today. I just haven't heard anything over the last 72 to 96 hours. And so I guess we'll see where that goes. And so I'd rather not comment until we see exactly what happens. I'm supportive of there being a ballot initiative. I know we've got to get an agreement between the House and the Senate. People ought to have access to the ballot, but it ought not be easy. I mean, I think that's what I've said all along, and that's something that I think exactly what the definition of that is going to be determined throughout the process. Yes, ma'am.
There's a couple of initiatives in the House and the Senate to provide some tax incentives for either employers or others that would assist women and families, whether that be a child care tax incentive or the Pregnancy Crisis Center. What are some other ways that you feel the state can help support women, especially in this post-jobs world, when we're expecting to see a larger influx of babies being born?
Yeah, so that I think the bill you're referring to is Speaker Gunn's bill. 1,000% I'm supportive of it. 1,000%. It's we actually had the Speaker and I spoke about this last week. I think what he's trying to do makes tremendous sense. We support not only more investments in our foster care system, we also support more tax credits for our foster care children. And that's something that we want to continue to see. Certainly, last year I was one of the first governors in America to sign legislation that provided a tax credit for our pregnancy resource centers. Again, I believe that was a Speaker Gunn bill as well. $3.5 million last year. This particular bill pushes it to 10. 100% supportive of that. I think that needs to pass, and I hope it passes very, very soon and very quickly. In addition to that, we are seeing progress on our new pro-life agenda that we released back a couple of months ago. Different chambers in the House and Senate have passed various bills to push us in that direction, and this is one way in which to do that. So, again, very good. Yes, sir.
What do you say to those who describe your decision to support the expansion of postpartum Medicaid as a political calculation on your part?
Look, as you probably know, I've been doing this for a while, and I get criticized constantly by those on the far left, and I know that those on the far left are going to criticize me no matter what I do. No matter what I do, they're going to criticize me. So I just get up and do what I think's right for the people of Mississippi, and I'll let the political consequences fall where they may. I do want to just point out one of the very important distinctions here between postpartum versus Medicaid expansion is with the extension of postpartum, there's not one individual in the state that will receive a Medicaid benefit that was not already eligible to receive Medicaid benefits. So there is no expansion of Medicaid coverage. There is an extension of that coverage, and that extension actually occurred in March of 2020 in the state of Mississippi through federal action, and for all intents and purposes in 48 other states has been in effect for a large period of time. And I would just point out with respect to postpartum, Governor Abbott one day last week proposed extending theirs from 6 months to 12 months in the state of Texas. And so this is something that in the post-jobs world, I think you're seeing more and more Republicans, albeit without data which guarantees that there is a guarantee that our mortality rates and others will improve. It certainly stands to reason if those moms, once they have the baby, if they are seeking and receiving postpartum medical care for 12 months, it certainly leads one to hope that is in fact the case. Yes.
Can you talk in more detail about the evidence you have that gender-affirming care is harming children in the state of Mississippi?
Well, I think I answered this question earlier. That those who oppose what we have done here today 2 weeks ago were very adamant about the fact that this was going to harm Mississippi children, that this was going to lead to more suicides. In fact, the question's already been asked today that this is going to lead to more suicides. But now that the bill has passed, that I have signed it into law, the argument from the left and in some instances from the media has shifted to now, well, these things, this care wasn't being provided to kids anyway, so it's not going to have any impact. It can't be both. It can be one or it can be the other, but it can't be both. And so I would just say I think that if your notion is that these types of surgeries were not occurring, and if it is your contention that the drugs were not being prescribed and not being given to people under the age of 18, if you believe that, well, that's fine. What I can tell you now is in the future, it will continue to not be allowed in Mississippi because now it is against the law.
Slightly off subject, but while we have you here, the backlog in the crime lab has been a problem statewide, and it's part of the contributing problem in the backlog of cases in the Hinds County judicial system. What's your position on finally funding the crime lab at a level that the people who run the lab say it needs to be funded?
Yeah, what I would tell you is we have made progress at the crime lab in the state of Mississippi over the last 3 years, but we have not made enough progress. And so Commissioner Tyndall has asked the legislature for additional funding, and they have been giving us additional funding over the last several years. It takes time. We've actually now funded additional medical examiners. For instance, when I was midway through my lieutenant governor's term, we didn't even have a real ME's office down on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and now we have 2 medical examiners, and I've actually been there and had conversations with them. We got to continue to work. It's not the easiest thing to do because we have to hire medical professionals to serve in those roles. In many instances, we have to hire them from out of state and bring them here. We've been successful with a couple of those. We've had some turnover. We've got to find alternative ways as well, and Commissioner Tyndall is working very hard on that every day. It is, again, I think we've made a lot of progress in a lot of areas, and that's one that we have made progress, but we hadn't made enough, and we got to keep working towards it. Yes.
I wanted to again follow up on my last question. I'm wondering, more specifically, have you talked to a child in Mississippi or a family of a trans child in Mississippi, or even a provider in Mississippi who has said, I've seen gender-affirming care harm this kid? And if so, can you please tell us in more detail?
Look, I'm not going to reveal private conversations that I've had, but I will tell you that I don't have to. I think it's just intuitive to know that it's happening here. And if you listen to some of these children that allowed themselves to go through this, and talk to them 5 years later, talk to them 10 years later, what you're going to find is it has been harmful to them in ways. And there are people all over the country that are giving speeches to this effect right now. And I don't want that to happen to any Mississippi kid, period. All right. Well, thank you all for being here, and see you soon. Appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Let me give you one of these pens. You get a parting gift.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.